Captain Maya floated through the darkness of space inside her emergency escape pod. The tiny vessel spun slowly, tumbling end over end through the endless black void. Through the small circular window, she watched the stars wheel past in a dizzying dance. Her breath came in short, controlled gasps. The oxygen meter on her wrist display showed she had maybe 6 hours left. After that, she would simply fall asleep and never wake up. She had been a cargo pilot for the United Earth Transport Company for 7 years. In all that time, she had never lost a ship, until today. The attack had come without warning. Her freighter, the Morning Star, had been hauling medical supplies to a colony world on the outer rim of explored space. One moment she was drinking her morning coffee and checking navigation charts. The next moment, alarms were screaming and her ship was breaking apart around her. Pirates? They had used some kind of weapon she had never seen before. It cut through her shields like they were not even there. The Morning Star was an old ship, but she was tough. She should have been able to take a hit or two and keep flying. Instead, she came apart at the seams. Maya had barely made it to the escape pod in time. She had grabbed her emergency kit and launched herself into the void just as the main fuel tanks exploded. The blast had sent her pod tumbling away from the wreckage at high speed. By the time she managed to stabilize her spin, the pirates were long gone. They had taken whatever cargo survived the explosion and left her for dead. That was 8 hours ago. Now Maya floated alone in the vast emptiness between stars. Her distress beacon was transmitting, but she was far from any shipping lanes. The chances of someone picking up her signal before her oxygen ran out were very small. She had accepted that she was probably going to die out here, but she was not ready to give up yet. Maya was human, and humans did not give up easily. She pulled herself over to the small control panel of her escape pod and checked the sensor display again. For the 100th time, the screen flickered and showed the same disappointing results. Nothing but empty space in every direction. No ships, no stations, no planets close enough to reach. But wait. Maya leaned closer to the screen. There was something there. A faint contact at the very edge of her sensor range. It was big, very big, and it was not moving. She tapped the controls and tried to get a better reading. The escape pod sensors were not designed for long-range scanning. They were meant to help rescue ships find survivors, not to explore the depths of space. But Maya had modified her pod systems years ago. She was always tinkering with things, always trying to make them work better. Her used to joke that she could not leave any machine alone for more than 5 minutes without trying to improve it. The enhanced sensors slowly pulled in more data about the mysterious contact. Maya's eyes went wide as the information appeared on her screen. It was a starship, a massive one, bigger than anything she had ever seen in her life. The ship was roughly cylindrical in shape, with huge engine pods at the rear and a complex network of structures along its hull. Maya estimated it was at least 3 kilometers long, maybe more. Her entire freighter could have fit inside one of its cargo bays with room to spare. But there was something wrong with it. The ship was dark. No lights, no energy signatures, no sign of life. It was just floating there in the void, silent and still like a giant metal corpse. A dead starship. Maya felt her heart beating faster. A ship that size had to have oxygen reserves. Even if the life support systems were offline, there would be emergency supplies. Tanks of compressed air, chemical oxygen generators, something. If she could reach that ship, she might be able to survive long enough for someone to find her. It was a long shot. The ship was clearly damaged or abandoned. There was no telling what condition it was in inside, but it was better than floating here and waiting to suffocate. Maya made her decision in less than a second. She fired up the escape pod's small thruster and set a course for the dead starship. The little engine coughed and sputtered, damaged from the explosion that had destroyed her freighter, but it worked well enough to push her toward her target. The journey took almost 2 hours. Maya spent that time studying the mysterious ship and trying to figure out what she was dealing with. The closer she got, the more details she could make out, and the more confused she became. The ship was old. That much was obvious from its design. The hull plating was thick and heavy, built in a style that had not been used for centuries. The engine pods were massive chemical rockets, not the sleek fusion drives that modern ships used. The whole thing looked like something out of a history book. But it was also clearly alien. Maya had seen ships from a dozen different species during her years as a pilot, trading vessels with their organic hulls, warships bristling with weapons, the strange crystalline structures of exploration craft. She knew alien technology when she saw it. This ship was different from all of them. The design language was completely unfamiliar. The angles were wrong somehow, built according to principles she did not understand. The hull was covered in symbols and markings in a language she had never seen before. And yet there was something about it that felt almost familiar. Something in the proportions and layout that reminded her of human ships, like a distant cousin from a branch of the family she had never known existed. Maya shook off the strange feeling and focused on the practical problem of getting aboard. Her escape pod was not designed for docking with anything except standard rescue ships. She would have to find another way in. She guided her pod along the length of the massive vessel, looking for an opening. The hull was pockmarked with damage. Some kind of battle had happened here, long ago. Blast craters and torn metal plating showed where weapons had struck. Several sections had been completely destroyed, leaving gaping holes that led into the dark interior. Maya found a suitable breach near the middle of the ship. It looked like an entire compartment had been blown open by an explosion from inside. The edges of the hole were bent outward, the metal twisted and warped by tremendous force. Whatever had happened here, it had been violent. She maneuvered her pod as close as she could and then suited up for a space walk. Her emergency suit was basic, designed for short-term use only. It would keep her alive for maybe an hour in hard vacuum. After that, the small air supply would run out. Maya took a deep breath and opened the pod's hatch. The cold void of space welcomed her with silent indifference. She pushed off from the pod and floated toward the dead starship, using her suit's tiny maneuvering jets to guide herself. Up close, the alien vessel was even more impressive. The hull plating was thick enough that she could have walked on it. Strange machinery jutted out at odd angles, its purpose completely unknown. Everything was covered in a thin layer of dust and ice crystals, frozen debris from whatever catastrophe had killed this ship. Maya pulled herself through the breach in the hull and found herself floating in a dark corridor. Emergency lights should have activated when she entered, but there was no power. The ship was completely dead. She switched on her suit's helmet light and looked around. The corridor was wide enough for 3 people to walk side by side. The walls were lined with pipes and conduits, similar to the service corridors on human ships but scaled up dramatically. Everything was bigger here. Whoever had built this vessel was either much larger than humans or simply liked having lots of space. Maya consulted the simple map that her suit's computer was building as she moved. She needed to find the life support systems first. Air was her most immediate problem. Everything else could wait. She pulled herself along the corridor, using handholds that were spaced too far apart for comfortable human use. The gravity generators were offline along with everything else, so she floated through the ship like a ghost. Her helmet light cast strange shadows on the walls, making the alien symbols seem to move and shift. The deeper she went into the ship, the stranger things became. She passed through compartments filled with machinery she could not identify. Banks of equipment lined the walls, dark and silent. Control panels covered in alien text waited for hands that would never return to activate them. In one large room, she found what looked like a garden. Rows of strange plants grew in hydroponic tanks, their leaves withered and brown. Whatever species had once tended this garden was long gone, but the plants had survived for a while on their own before finally dying. Maya felt a pang of sadness at the sight. Someone had cared for these plants once. Someone had watered them and watched them grow. Now they were just more dead things on a dead ship. She pressed on, trying to build a mental map of the ship's layout. Human vessels followed certain logical patterns: bridge at the front, engines at the back, life support and other critical systems near the center. This ship seemed to follow similar principles, though the details were different. After nearly 30 minutes of searching, Maya found what she was looking for: a large compartment deep in the heart of the ship, filled with massive tanks and complex machinery. The life support center. She pulled herself inside and swept her light around the room. The tanks were enormous, easily 10 meters tall. Most of them were empty, their contents long since depleted or leaked away. But a few still showed traces of frost on their surfaces, indicating that something was still inside. Maya moved to the nearest tank and examined it closely. The controls were labeled in the alien language, but the basic design was similar enough to human systems that she could figure out what was what. This tank contained compressed gas of some kind. The question was whether it was breathable. She found a small sampling port on the side of the tank and connected it to her suit's analyzer. The device hummed quietly as it tested the gas inside. Maya held her breath, waiting for the results. The analyzer beeped. Maya looked at the display and felt her heart skip a beat. Oxygen, pure, clean oxygen. She had found enough air to keep her alive for months, maybe years, if she could figure out how to access it properly. Maya got to work immediately. Her suit's air supply was getting low, and she did not have time to waste. She needed to find a way to release the oxygen from the tanks and fill a space where she could breathe freely. The challenge was that the entire ship was in vacuum. Every compartment had been exposed to space at some point during whatever disaster had killed the vessel. She needed to find or create a sealed area, pump it full of oxygen, and then she could take off her helmet and breathe normally. She searched the life support center for tools and supplies. The aliens had been methodical in their storage, keeping everything organized in labeled compartments. Maya could not read the labels, but she could recognize the shapes of tools and equipment: wrenches, cutting devices, welding equipment, rolls of what looked like sealing tape. Armed with these supplies, she set out to create herself a home. Maya selected a small compartment near the life support center. It looked like it had been some kind of storage room, with shelves lining the walls and a single door that could be sealed shut. The room was small enough that she could fill it with oxygen without using too much of the precious gas. She spent the next 3 hours working. First, she checked every centimeter of the walls, floor, and ceiling for cracks or holes. She found several small breaches and sealed them with the alien tape, which turned out to work almost exactly like the repair patches she was familiar with. Then she examined the door, making sure it would close properly and form an airtight seal. The door was the biggest problem. The explosion that had damaged the ship had warped the frame slightly, leaving a gap along one side. Maya used the alien welding tool to fill the gap with metal, then covered it with more sealing tape. It was not pretty, but it would hold. Finally, she ran a length of hose from the oxygen tanks to her new shelter. The hose fittings did not match perfectly, but she improvised adapters using pieces of pipe and lots of tape. She had always been good at improvising. It was a human specialty. When everything was ready, Maya sealed the door and opened the valve on the oxygen tank. She watched the pressure gauge on her suit anxiously as the room slowly filled with breathable air. The temperature was still freezing cold, but she could deal with that later. Air was the priority. The gauge crept upward: 0.1 atmospheres, 0.2, 0.3. The hissing of gas filling the room grew louder: 0.5 atmospheres, 0.7. Finally, the gauge showed a full atmosphere of pressure, enough to breathe normally. Maya closed the valve and waited. If her seals were good, the pressure would hold. If not, the room would slowly leak back to vacuum and she would have wasted precious oxygen. She watched the gauge for 15 minutes. The pressure did not drop. Maya laughed out loud, the sound strange in her helmet after so many hours of silence. She had done it. She had created a tiny bubble of life in this dead ship. She reached up and unsealed her helmet. The air was cold and had a strange metallic taste, but it was breathable. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with sweet oxygen. Tears formed in the corners of her eyes. She was not going to die today. But survival was just the first step. She was still stranded on a dead alien starship, far from any hope of rescue. Her distress beacon was still transmitting from the escape pod, but even if someone picked up the signal, they would have trouble finding her aboard this massive vessel. She needed to do more than just survive. She needed to find a way to call for help, or better yet, find a way off this ship entirely. Maya spent the next several hours exploring her new home and taking stock of her resources. The dead starship was full of supplies that the previous owners had left behind. Food stores that were centuries old but still preserved by the cold vacuum. Water ice that had formed from leaking pipes. Clothing and bedding that was too large for her but could be modified. Tools and equipment of all kinds. The aliens who had built this ship had been thorough in their preparations. They had clearly intended for long voyages into deep space. Every compartment she explored contained supplies and equipment for survival. It was as if the entire ship had been designed with the possibility of disaster in mind, which made it all the more mysterious why it was now dead and drifting in the void. Maya found what she believed was the ship's bridge after hours of exploration. It was located near the front of the vessel, a large circular room filled with control stations and display screens. Everything was dark and dead, of course, but as she swept her light around the room, she noticed something strange. There were no bodies. She had been half expecting to find the remains of the ship's crew somewhere. A disaster bad enough to kill a ship this size should have left casualties, but she had not found a single body in all her exploration. No bones, no personal effects, nothing to indicate that anyone had been aboard when the end came. Either the crew had evacuated successfully, or something else had happened to them. Maya did not know which possibility was more disturbing. She turned her attention to the ship's control systems. If she could restore power to even a small part of the vessel, she might be able to access the computer systems and learn more about where she was and what had happened here. She might even be able to activate a more powerful distress signal. But first, she needed to understand how the ship worked. And that meant studying the alien technology until she could figure out its secrets. Maya settled onto the captain's chair and looked around at the dead bridge. The chair was much too large for her, built for someone twice her size, but she could make it work. She had always been good at making things work. Over the next few days, Maya established a routine. She would spend her mornings exploring the ship, mapping its layout and cataloging its contents. In the afternoons, she would study the alien technology, trying to understand how it functioned. In the evenings, she would work on improving her shelter, making it more comfortable and better sealed. The ship was vast, and she had barely scratched the surface of exploring it. She estimated that it would take months to examine every compartment, every system, every piece of equipment. But she had time, plenty of time. Her biggest challenge was the cold. The ship had no heating, and the temperature was barely above absolute zero. Maya wore multiple layers of alien clothing that she had modified to fit her smaller frame. She built a small heating system using chemical reaction packs she found in an emergency supply closet. It was not much, but it kept her shelter warm enough to survive. Food was less of a problem than she had expected. The alien food stores contained a variety of dried and preserved items. Most of them were unrecognizable, but her suit's analyzer could test them for toxicity. She found several types of grain-like material and dried fruit that were safe for human consumption. The taste was strange, but she had eaten worse during her years as a freighter pilot. Water she obtained by melting ice that had formed in the ship's abandoned pipes. The aliens had used a water recycling system similar to human designs, and the pipes were full of frozen residue. Maya set up a collection system that gathered the ice and melted it using her chemical heaters. The water tasted faintly of metal, but it was pure and clean. As the days passed, Maya became more and more fascinated by the dead starship and its creators. The technology was advanced in some ways and primitive in others. The engines were clearly designed for long-duration travel, capable of accelerating the massive vessel to significant fractions of light speed. But there were no faster-than-light drives, no jump systems, no hyperspace capability. This ship had been built to cross the vast distances between stars the hard way, spending years or decades in transit. The computer systems were equally puzzling. They used a form of data storage that Maya had never seen before, based on crystalline matrices rather than electronic circuits. When she finally managed to power up a small terminal using a portable battery she had improvised, the interface was completely unlike anything she was familiar with. The alien language scrolled across the screen in meaningless symbols, accompanied by diagrams and images that hinted at vast stores of knowledge just out of reach. Maya spent hours trying to decipher the language. She was not a linguist, but she was good at pattern recognition. She started by identifying repeated symbols and trying to match them to concepts. Numbers were the easiest to figure out since they followed logical mathematical patterns. From there, she worked on technical terms, using the diagrams to guess at meanings. It was slow, frustrating work, but she made progress. Day by day, the alien language became a little less mysterious. 2 weeks after her arrival on the dead starship, Maya made a breakthrough. She was examining a schematic of the ship's power systems when she noticed something that made her heart race. The main reactor was not destroyed, it was just off. According to the schematic, the ship used a fusion power system similar in principle to human designs but vastly more powerful. The reactor was located deep in the engineering section, protected by layers of shielding and armor. Maya had assumed it was damaged beyond repair, like everything else on the ship. But the diagnostic diagram showed that the reactor itself was intact. It had simply been shut down. Someone had turned off the ship's power on purpose. Maya stared at the screen, her mind racing. If she could restart the reactor, she could bring the whole ship back to life. Lights, heat, life support, communications, maybe even engines. She could fly this thing. She could take herself home. But first, she had to figure out how to turn it back on. She gathered all the information she could find about the ship's power systems and retreated to her shelter to study. The technical manuals were complex, but she was starting to understand the alien language well enough to make sense of them. She worked through the night, barely sleeping, driven by the possibility of escape. By morning, she had a plan. The reactor startup sequence was complicated, involving dozens of steps that had to be performed in precise order. Many of the control systems were located in the engineering section, far from Maya's shelter. She would have to travel deep into the ship, to areas she had not yet explored. But she was ready. She had spent 2 weeks learning this ship, understanding its systems, adapting to its alien design. She knew more about it now than most human engineers knew about their own vessels. She could do this. Maya checked her suit, gathered her tools, and set out toward the engineering section. The journey took her through parts of the ship she had never seen before. Massive cargo holds that could have stored entire freighters, manufacturing facilities with silent machines waiting for workers who would never return, recreation areas with strange alien games and entertainment systems. And still no bodies, no sign of what had happened to the crew. The engineering section was located at the rear of the ship, just forward of the massive engine pods. Maya had to pass through several airlocks and security doors to reach it. Most of the doors were jammed or locked, and she had to cut through them with her welding tool. It was slow, exhausting work. But finally, she reached the reactor chamber. The fusion reactor was a massive sphere, easily 50 meters in diameter, suspended in the center of a huge chamber by magnetic containment fields. Or it would be once power was restored. Right now, it just hung there, dead and cold like everything else on the ship. Maya consulted her notes and began the startup sequence. The first step was to activate the emergency backup power system, which would provide enough energy to begin the reactor's cold start procedure. She found the backup power controls and traced the circuits back to a bank of chemical batteries that were still holding a charge after all these centuries. She took a deep breath and threw the switch. Nothing happened. Maya frowned and checked the connections. Everything looked correct according to the schematics, but the power was not flowing. Something was blocking the circuit. She followed the power lines, tracing them through the chamber until she found the problem. A safety interlock had been engaged, physically disconnecting the backup power from the reactor systems. Someone had deliberately disabled the ship's ability to restart. But why? Maya stood in the dark chamber thinking. The more she learned about this ship, the more questions she had. Why was it abandoned? Why were there no bodies? Why had someone gone to such lengths to make sure the reactor stayed offline? She did not have answers, but she had a job to do. The safety interlock was a heavy mechanical switch, designed to be obvious and difficult to accidentally trigger. Maya examined it carefully, making sure she understood how it worked. Then she grabbed the handle and pulled. The switch was stiff, frozen in place by centuries of disuse. Maya braced her feet against the deck plating and pulled harder. Her muscles strained. Her suit's power assist whined with effort. The switch moved, slowly at first, then faster as the ancient mechanism broke free. It clicked into the active position with a satisfying thunk. Somewhere deep in the ship, machinery began to hum. Maya rushed back to the control panel and watched as indicators started to light up. The backup power was flowing now, energizing systems that had been dormant for longer than human civilization had existed. She worked quickly through the startup sequence, activating system after system according to her notes. The reactor chamber began to glow. Magnetic containment fields flickered to life, suspending the reactor core in its proper position. Fuel lines opened, allowing deuterium to flow into the reaction chamber. Temperature gauges began to climb. Maya held her breath as the reactor approached ignition point. If something went wrong now, the resulting explosion would vaporize her and probably the entire ship. But she had come too far to stop. The temperature gauge hit critical. Fusion ignition occurred. The reactor blazed to life, flooding the chamber with brilliant white light. Power flowed through the ship systems like blood returning to a corpse. Lights came on throughout the vessel. Machinery hummed and clicked as it awakened from its long sleep. Maya stood in the center of the engineering section, bathed in the glow of the living reactor, and laughed with joy. She had done it. She had brought a dead starship back to life. But this was just the beginning. The ship was running, but it was far from repaired. Centuries of damage and neglect had left countless systems broken or degraded. If she wanted to actually fly this thing, she had a lot more work to do. Maya looked around at the vast engineering section, at the alien machinery that was now humming with power, at the centuries of mysteries waiting to be unraveled. She smiled and rolled up her sleeves. Time to get to work. The lights changed everything. For the first time since arriving on the alien vessel, Maya could see her surroundings clearly. The emergency lighting cast a soft blue glow through every corridor, every chamber, every forgotten corner of the massive ship. Shadows retreated into cracks and crevices, revealing details she had missed during her weeks of exploration in the dark. The walls were covered in intricate artwork. Murals depicting scenes from an alien world painted the corridors in faded colors. Strange creatures that might have been animals or might have been the builders themselves moved through landscapes of purple forests and orange skies. Cities with impossible architecture rose toward twin suns. Ships that looked like the one she stood in now flew through clouds of stars. Maya walked slowly through the illuminated ship, seeing it with new eyes. These were not just machines and systems. This had been someone's home, maybe many someone's. An entire civilization had built this vessel, decorated it with their art, filled it with their hopes and dreams. And then they had vanished, leaving only their creation behind. Who were they? What happened to them? The questions burned in Maya's mind as she made her way back toward the bridge. With the reactor running, she could finally access the ship's computer systems properly. The crystalline data storage came online, filling screens throughout the vessel with scrolling alien text. Maya had spent weeks learning to read basic technical terms, but this was different. This was history, stories, records of events that had occurred long before humanity had discovered fire. She settled into the captain's chair on the bridge, which felt slightly less absurd now that the room was properly lit. The main display screen flickered and stabilized, showing what appeared to be a navigation chart. Stars and planetary systems were marked with alien symbols, connected by lines that might have represented travel routes or political boundaries. Maya leaned forward and began searching for any star system she might recognize. The galaxy was vast, and she was only familiar with a tiny portion of it. But if she could identify even one landmark, she might be able to figure out where she was. It took her several hours of cross-referencing the alien star charts with her own navigation database, but eventually she found a match. A cluster of 7 stars in a distinctive pattern that humans called the Seven Sisters. The aliens had a different name for it, rendered in symbols she could not pronounce, but the configuration was unmistakable. Based on the position of the 7 sisters on the alien chart, Maya calculated her approximate location. She was far from home, very far. The nearest human settlement was at least 8 months of travel at the best speed her damaged escape pod could have managed. No wonder no one had come looking for her. She was completely outside of known space. But this massive starship could travel much faster than her tiny pod. If she could get the engines working, she could cover that distance in weeks instead of months. Maya turned her attention to the ship's propulsion systems. The main engines were enormous fusion rockets, capable of accelerating the multi-kilometer vessel to impressive speeds. According to the technical data she pulled from the computer, they could reach nearly 15% of light speed at maximum thrust. That was faster than any human ship she had ever heard of. But the engines had been offline for even longer than the reactor. When Maya ran a diagnostic check, the results were not encouraging. 2 of the 4 main engine pods showed critical damage. The third was questionable. Only the 4th engine appeared to be functional, and even that one needed significant repairs. She would be working with 1/4 of the ship's intended propulsion capacity. That would still be enough to move, but barely. Her speed would be limited, and any course corrections would be slow and difficult. Still, it was better than nothing. Maya downloaded the repair procedures for the engines and started planning her next steps. The work was grueling. The engine pods were located at the extreme rear of the ship, accessible only through a maze of service corridors and maintenance shafts. Each trip from her shelter to the engineering section took over an hour. She had to carry tools and supplies through zero-gravity passages, climbing and crawling through spaces that had been designed for beings much larger than herself. The repairs themselves were challenging in ways she had not anticipated. Human engines used magnetic containment to control the fusion reaction. These alien engines used something different, something she did not fully understand even after reading all the technical documentation she could find. The containment system involved crystalline matrices similar to the computer storage, arranged in precise geometric patterns that had to be perfectly aligned for the engine to function safely. Several of the crystals in the functional engine were cracked or clouded. Maya had to find replacements from the damaged engines and install them without disturbing the delicate alignment. It was precision work that would have been challenging in a proper workshop. Doing it in a spacesuit, floating in zero gravity, with tools designed for hands twice the size of her own, was nearly impossible. But Maya refused to give up. She worked methodically, solving one problem at a time. When she did not have the right tool, she improvised. When she did not understand a system, she studied until she did. When she made mistakes, she learned from them and tried again. Humans were stubborn that way. 3 weeks after restarting the reactor, Maya finally completed the engine repairs. She floated in the control room of the functional engine pod, surrounded by humming machinery, and prepared to run a test burn. Her hand hesitated over the ignition control. If she had made any mistakes, if any of the repairs were faulty, the engine could explode. The blast would destroy not just the engine pod but probably a significant portion of the ship, including her. Maya thought about her life back home, her small apartment on Luna Station, her friends in the Pilots Guild, the little restaurant on Deck 7 where she always got breakfast before a run. All of it seemed very far away now. She took a deep breath and pressed the ignition button. The engine roared to life. The deck plating vibrated beneath her feet as tremendous power flowed through the propulsion system. The entire ship shuddered and began to move, pushed by the force of the single working engine. Maya whooped with joy and punched the air. She was flying, sort of. The ship was barely crawling compared to its original capability, but it was moving and she was in control. She made her way back to the bridge, using the ship's internal transport system now that power was restored. The transport pods were designed for larger beings, but they worked well enough for humans. Maya zipped through the corridors at speeds that would have taken her hours to cover on foot. On the bridge, she set a course for human space. The navigation computer calculated a travel time of 11 weeks at her current maximum speed. Nearly 3 months of travel through unexplored territory, alone on a ship built by a vanished alien civilization. Maya settled back in the captain's chair and smiled. She had survived worse. The first few days of the journey were uneventful. Maya established a new routine, dividing her time between monitoring the ship's systems, continuing her exploration and repairs, and studying the alien records. The historical data in the computer was fascinating. She was getting better at reading the alien language, and she could now understand basic concepts and sentences. The beings who had built this ship called themselves the Architects. They had been a spacefaring civilization for millions of years, spreading across a significant portion of the galaxy. Their technology was advanced beyond anything humans had achieved, and yet they had eventually fallen. The records spoke of a great catastrophe, an event that had brought their civilization to an end. But the details were frustratingly vague. Maya could not find any clear explanation of what had happened, just references to the ending and the long silence that followed. Whatever had destroyed the Architects, they had seen it coming. They had prepared for it, shutting down their ships and sealing their cities against some unknown threat. And then they had simply stopped. Their civilization ended, their people vanished, leaving only empty ships and dead worlds behind. Maya wondered if humans would ever suffer the same fate. It was not a comfortable thought. On the 5th day of her journey, something changed. Maya was running a routine scan of nearby space when her sensors picked up an unexpected contact. Another ship, moving on an intercept course. Her heart leaped. Rescue, someone had found her. But as she watched the contact approach, her excitement turned to concern. The ship was not broadcasting any identification signal. Its profile did not match any human vessel in her database, and it was coming fast, much faster than her own laboring ship could move. Maya tried to raise them on communications. She broadcast greetings in human standard, in the 3 alien languages she knew a few phrases of, and in mathematical sequences that any intelligent species should recognize. There was no response. The unknown ship continued to close the distance. Maya could now see it on the optical sensors, a sleek predatory shape that reminded her uncomfortably of the pirates who had destroyed her freighter. It was smaller than her architect vessel, but clearly more advanced. Weapons ports lined its hull. She was being hunted. Maya's mind raced through her options. She could not outrun them. Her single working engine could barely push the massive architect ship at a fraction of its design speed. She could not fight. The alien ship was clearly a warship, while hers was an exploration vessel that had never been designed for combat. But she could hide. The architect ship was enormous, filled with thousands of compartments and systems. Many of them still showed no power, no life signs. If she shut down the reactor and went dark, the architect ship would look like just another dead hulk drifting through space. The hunters might pass her by. It was a gamble, but Maya did not see any better options. She rushed through the ship, powering down every system she could reach. The lights went out one by one, plunging the vessel back into darkness. The comfortable warmth faded as the heating systems shut down. The soft hum of machinery fell silent. Finally, Maya returned to the reactor chamber and began the shutdown sequence. The brilliant glow of the fusion core dimmed and died. Once again, the architect's ship was a cold, dark tomb floating through the void. Maya retreated to her shelter, the small compartment she had sealed and filled with oxygen during her first days aboard. She had kept it maintained even after restoring power to the rest of the ship. Now she was grateful for her caution. The shelter had its own independent air supply, separate from the ship's life support. She could survive here for weeks if necessary. She sealed the door and settled in to wait, watching through a tiny viewport as the unknown ship approached. The hunters took their time. They circled the architect vessel slowly, scanning it with sensors that Maya could feel even through the thick hull. She held her breath, terrified that they would detect her heartbeat or the warmth of her body against the frozen background of the ship. Minutes passed. The hunters continued their orbit, moving closer and closer. Maya could see details now through her viewport. The ship was even more frightening up close. Its hull was covered in what looked like organic growths, as if living tissue had been merged with metal and machinery. Strange symbols were painted on its surface, similar to nothing she had ever seen. This was not a human ship. It was not any species she recognized. These were strangers from beyond known space, and they had come hunting. The alien ship completed its orbit and paused, hovering near the architect vessel's bow. Maya could almost feel it thinking, deciding what to do. Had her deception worked? Or would they board the ship and find her hiding in the dark? Finally, the hunters moved. Their ship accelerated away from the architect vessel, resuming its original course through space. In moments it was gone, vanished into the vast darkness between stars. Maya slumped against the wall of her shelter, weak with relief. She had fooled them. Her dead ship had fooled the hunters. But she had no illusions about her safety. The hunters were still out there somewhere. And now she knew that she was not alone in this region of space. Other things lived here, things that might be hostile to humans, things that might come looking for her again. She could not afford to be caught by surprise a second time. Maya spent the next several hours thinking about her situation. She was a pilot, not a soldier. Her skills were in navigation and ship handling, not combat. But she had spent her whole career working with machines, modifying them, improving them. The architect vessel had been designed for exploration, but it was still a massive piece of technology. Maybe she could adapt it for defense. She started with the sensors. The architect ship had impressive scanning capabilities, but they were designed for scientific research rather than detecting threats. Maya modified the sensor arrays to focus on picking up ship signatures at maximum range. If the hunters came back, she wanted to know about it long before they arrived. Next, she turned her attention to the ship's few defensive systems. The architects had not been a warlike species, but they had included basic protection against natural hazards. Meteor shields, radiation barriers, hull reinforcement systems. Maya studied these systems and thought about how they might be used against an attacker. The meteor shields were particularly interesting. They created a powerful electromagnetic field around the ship that could deflect small objects and debris. If she could increase the field strength enough, it might be able to disrupt incoming weapons fire or even damage enemy sensors. She worked on the modifications for days, testing and adjusting until she was satisfied. The enhanced shields would not hold up against a determined attack, but they might buy her valuable seconds to escape or counterattack. The question of counterattack was more difficult. The architect's ship had no weapons, nothing designed to damage other vessels, but Maya was creative. She looked at the ship's systems with new eyes, thinking about how they might be weaponized. The main engine was a fusion torch capable of generating temperatures hotter than the surface of a star. If she could vent plasma directly from the engine without passing it through the containment system, she would have a devastating short-range weapon. It would only work once, since the uncontained plasma would destroy the engine itself, but it might be enough to surprise an attacker. She rigged a bypass system that would allow her to trigger the plasma vent from the bridge. It was a desperate measure, a weapon of last resort, but it was better than having nothing. Maya also explored other options. The architect's ship carried scientific equipment that could be dangerous if misused. High-powered lasers designed for spectral analysis, particle accelerators for materials research, electromagnetic pulse generators for communication experiments. None of them were weapons, but all of them could potentially cause harm to an enemy ship. She connected these systems to the bridge controls, creating an improvised arsenal that probably violated every weapons convention in known space. But she was alone out here, far from any law or protection. She would use whatever tools she had to survive. With her defenses improved, Maya felt confident enough to restart the reactor and resume her journey. The ship came back to life around her, lights and warmth returning to chase away the darkness. She set a new course, slightly altered from her original path to avoid the direction the hunters had taken. The next few weeks passed quietly. Maya continued her exploration of the architect's ship, finding new wonders in every compartment. A library filled with crystalline storage devices containing the accumulated knowledge of a million-year civilization. A workshop where the architects had crafted intricate machines and beautiful artwork. A meditation chamber with windows that faced directly toward the distant stars. She also found more clues about the architects themselves. Holographic recordings showed beings that were roughly humanoid but distinctly different. They were tall and slender, with elongated limbs and faces that suggested great age and wisdom. Their skin was pale, almost translucent, with patterns of bioluminescence that flickered as they moved. The recordings showed daily life aboard the ship, architects working together to maintain the vessel, learning in the library, creating art in the workshop, playing games that Maya could not understand, living their lives just as humans lived theirs, unaware that their entire civilization would one day vanish. Maya felt a strange connection to these vanished beings. They were nothing like her, separated by millions of years and countless light years. And yet they had built a ship that she could operate, created systems that she could understand, lived lives that were not so different from her own. Maybe all intelligent species had more in common than they knew. On the 37th day of her journey, Maya's enhanced sensors detected something unusual. A large object directly in her path, roughly 2 days away at current speed. Not a ship this time, but something much bigger. She adjusted her course slightly to get a better look. As she drew closer, the object resolved into a structure of incredible scale. A space station, but unlike any she had ever seen. The central hub was a sphere at least 10 kilometers in diameter, surrounded by rings of docking facilities and habitat modules that extended outward for hundreds of kilometers in every direction. An architect station, still intact after all these. Maya's heart raced with excitement and caution. The station might contain supplies, technology, information that could help her journey, but it might also contain dangers. Other hunters might be lurking there, or automated defenses might still be active. She approached slowly, scanning the station constantly for any sign of threat. Everything appeared dead and cold, just like her ship had been when she first found it. No power, no movement, no life. Maya docked her massive vessel at one of the station's ports, a process that took several hours of careful maneuvering with only one working engine. The docking clamps were designed for architect ships, so the fit was perfect despite the size difference. She suited up and ventured into the station, moving cautiously through dark corridors that dwarfed even the huge passages of her ship. The station was vast beyond imagining, a city in space that had once housed millions of beings. Now it was empty, silent, waiting. Maya explored for hours, finding marvels at every turn, manufacturing facilities that could produce anything from raw materials, medical bays with equipment that seemed almost magical, transport systems that could move passengers from one end of the station to the other in minutes. And in the station's central core, she found something that made her stop and stare in wonder. A fleet of ships. Dozens of architect vessels, ranging from small shuttles to massive freighters, all docked in a protected hangar at the heart of the station. They were in better condition than her own ship, protected from the void by the station's thick hull. Some of them might even be functional. Maya walked among the silent ships, her mind spinning with possibilities. If she could get one of these working, she would have a backup. If several could be activated, she might be able to cannibalize parts to repair her own vessel more fully. But she did not have time for that now. The station was too exposed, too easy to find. She needed to gather what supplies she could and continue on her way before the hunters came looking. She spent 2 days at the station, working frantically to collect anything useful, spare parts for the ship systems, food and water supplies that were still preserved after all this time, crystalline data modules containing technical information and historical records, samples of architect technology that she could study later. She also made one more important find. In a secure vault near the station's command center, she discovered what appeared to be star charts and navigation data covering the entire known galaxy. The information was incredibly detailed, showing not just stars and planets but the locations of architect installations throughout space. Many were marked with symbols that Maya interpreted as warnings or danger signs. But some were marked differently. These locations were highlighted with symbols that seemed to indicate safety or refuge, places where survivors might gather in times of crisis. The closest of these safe locations was only 3 weeks away at her current speed, much closer than human space. Maya studied the charts carefully, weighing her options. She could continue on her original course toward human territory, 11 more weeks of travel through unknown and potentially hostile space. Or she could divert to the nearest architect refuge, hopping to find help or at least temporary safety. It was not an easy decision. Human space meant rescue, return to her normal life. But it was far away, and she had already encountered hunters on the route. The architect refuge was closer and might offer protection, but she had no idea what she would find there. More empty ruins, or something more dangerous. Maya thought about it for a long time. In the end, she decided to trust the architects. They had built a civilization that lasted millions of years. They had created technology that still functioned after eons of neglect. They had prepared for disaster, leaving behind refuges for survivors. If anyone could keep her safe in this dangerous region of space, it was them. She set a new course for the nearest refuge and resumed her journey. The days that followed were tense. Maya kept her enhanced sensors running constantly, watching for any sign of the hunters or other threats. She saw nothing, but that did not mean nothing was there. Space was vast, and even the best sensors could miss a ship that wanted to stay hidden. She used the time to continue studying the architect records. Her language skills had improved dramatically since she first boarded the dead ship. Now she could read full sentences and understand complex concepts. The history of the architects unfolded before her in fragments and pieces, like a puzzle she was slowly assembling. They had been a curious species, always exploring, always learning. Their civilization had spread across thousands of star systems, connecting dozens of intelligent species in a vast network of trade and cultural exchange. They had been scientists and artists, builders and dreamers. Everything they created was designed to last, to endure beyond their own lifetimes. But they had also been afraid. The references to the ending became clearer as Maya dug deeper into the records. The architects had known something was coming, a threat so terrible that their entire civilization had prepared to face it. They had built refuges and hidden caches of supplies. They had developed contingency plans and emergency protocols. And then when the time came, they had simply vanished. Maya could not find any record of what had actually happened. One day the architects were there, living their lives, preparing for the unknown threat. The next day they were gone, their cities empty, their ships drifting cold and dead through space. What could make an entire civilization disappear overnight? Maya did not know, and the not knowing frightened her more than any hunter. On the 15th day after leaving the station, Maya's sensors detected the refuge. It was hidden in an asteroid belt, a cluster of habitats and facilities built into the rocky bodies. The location was well chosen, naturally concealed and difficult to approach without knowing exactly where to look. Maya navigated through the asteroid field carefully, threading her massive ship between tumbling rocks with skills she had not known she possessed. The architect vessel was harder to control than any human craft she had flown, but she had become intimately familiar with its systems over the past months. It responded to her commands as if it had been built for her. The refuge was larger than she had expected. Multiple asteroids had been hollowed out and connected by sealed tunnels, creating a complex that could have housed tens of thousands of beings. Landing platforms dotted the surfaces of the larger rocks, sized for vessels of all types. Maya brought her ship to rest on one of the platforms and sat quietly for a moment, gathering her courage. She had no idea what waited for her inside: friends or enemies, safety or danger, answers or more questions. There was only one way to find out. She suited up and stepped out onto the platform, leaving her ship behind. The asteroid's weak gravity pulled at her gently as she walked toward the refuge's main entrance. The great doors were sealed, but she found a control panel nearby that responded to the codes she had learned from the station. The doors opened, Maya stepped inside, and found herself face to face with something she had never expected to see. Other humans. Maya froze in the doorway, her mind struggling to process what her eyes were seeing. 3 figures stood in the entrance chamber, wearing survival suits similar to her own. Their faces were unmistakably human: dark hair, brown skin, expressions of surprise that probably mirrored her own. For a long moment, no one spoke. They all just stared at each other, separated by a few meters of ancient alien floor. Then one of the strangers stepped forward, a woman about Maya's age with short-cropped hair and a scar running down her left cheek. She raised her hand in a universal gesture of peace. "You are human," she said, her voice carrying through the suit's external speakers. The accent was strange, the words slightly old-fashioned, but the language was unmistakably human standard. "Yes," Maya managed to say. "I am human. I am Captain Maya of the United Earth Transport Company. I was stranded on a dead architect ship. I found this place in their star charts." The woman exchanged glances with her companions. Something passed between them, a communication that Maya could not interpret. "We did not think there were any humans left in the outer regions," the woman said. "The hunters have been very thorough." "Hunters," Maya repeated. "I saw them. A ship that looked like it was made of metal and something organic. They scanned my ship but did not find me." "You are fortunate. The devourers rarely miss their prey. They have been hunting these stars for 10,000 years, ever since the architects fell." 10,000 years. The number hit Maya like a physical blow. She had known the architect's ship was ancient, but she had not realized just how much time had passed. 10,000 years was longer than all of recorded human history. "I have many questions," Maya said weakly. "As do we." The woman stepped closer and held out her hand. "I am Commander Vance of the colony ship Endeavor. My ancestors left Earth 30 generations ago, seeking new worlds beyond the boundaries of explored space. We found instead the ruins of the architects and the terror of the devourers." Maya took the offered hand and shook it firmly. The grip was strong, confident. "You came from Earth, but that is impossible. Humans have only been in space for a few centuries. We have never sent colony ships this far out." Smiled sadly. "History is long, Captain, and it is not always recorded accurately. Come inside. There is much to discuss." The refuge was more extensive than Maya had imagined. The hollowed asteroids contained living quarters, workshops, medical facilities, and agricultural domes that provided food for the inhabitants. Hundreds of humans lived here, descendants of the original colony ship that had fled Earth long before Maya's ancestors had dreamed of. Led Maya to a comfortable common room where they could talk privately. The other inhabitants gathered at a respectful distance, curious about the newcomer but too polite to intrude. Maya noticed that they were all strong and healthy-looking, their bodies adapted to low gravity and recycled air. "I do not understand," Maya said when they were seated. "How can there be humans so far from Earth? Our history records no such missions." Poured 2 cups of something that smelled like tea, but probably was not. She handed one to Maya and took a sip from the other before speaking. "Our ancestors left Earth during the Third World Crisis, more than 2,000 years before your history begins. The planet was dying. Pollution, war, climate collapse. A consortium of scientists and engineers secretly built a generation ship and launched it into deep space, hopping to find a new home among the stars." Maya listened in amazement. She had never heard of any third world crisis or secret exodus. But then, 2,000 years was a very long time. Entire civilizations could rise and fall in such a span. "The journey was meant to take 500 years, continued. But the ship suffered a malfunction that sent it far off course. By the time our ancestors regained control, they were deeper in space than any human had ever traveled. They found the ruins of the architects and realized they were not alone in the universe." "And the devourers?" His expression darkened. "The devourers came later. At first, our ancestors thought they were another species, just one more civilization among the many that had existed before. But they were wrong. The devourers are not a natural species. They are a weapon, a plague designed to wipe out all intelligent life." A weapon. Maya felt cold despite the comfortable temperature of the room. Who created them? Why? "We do not know. The architect records speak of an enemy from beyond the galaxy, beings of pure malice who sent the devourers to prepare the way for their arrival. But the architects defeated this enemy long ago, driving them back to whatever hell spawned them. Unfortunately, the devourers remained behind, continuing their mission even after their masters were destroyed." Maya thought about the dead architect's ship she had spent months repairing, about the missing crew and the deliberately disabled reactor, about the warnings in the star charts and the hidden refuges scattered across space. "The architects did not disappear," she said slowly. "They were wiped out by the devourers." "Yes, 10,000 years ago, the Devourers swept through architect space like a wave of destruction. Nothing survived. Entire star systems were scoured clean of life. The architects had prepared for this possibility, hiding supplies and knowledge for future generations. But they themselves were gone within a single generation. And yet humans survived. Nodded. Our ancestors were lucky. When the Devourers came, the Endeavor was hidden deep in an asteroid belt, completely powered down and invisible to sensors. The same trick you used to escape them. We have been hiding ever since, moving from refuge to refuge, keeping our numbers small and our presence hidden. Maya absorbed this information, trying to fit it into her understanding of the universe. Everything she had known about space and humanity's place in it was suddenly revealed as a tiny fragment of a much larger picture. Earth, she said, does Earth still exist? Do you have contact with human space? Shook her head. We lost contact with Earth long ago. For centuries, we assumed that the Devourers had found and destroyed humanities. But if you are from Earth, that means our people survived. Not just survived, Maya said, flourished. There are dozens of human colony worlds now, thousands of space stations and ships. The United Earth government administers a territory covering 100 light years. Stared at her, tears forming in her eyes. We thought, for so long, we thought we were the last, the only humans left in all the universe. You are not alone. There are billions of us. The news spread through the refuge like wildfire. People came to see Maya, to touch her, to confirm with their own eyes that the impossible was true. Earth had survived. Humanity had not just endured but expanded across the stars. The lonely survivors of the Endeavor were not the last of their kind. The celebrations lasted for days. Maya found herself treated as a hero, a messenger of hope who had crossed the vast emptiness of space to bring good news. She told them everything she knew about modern human civilization, describing technologies and accomplishments that sounded like fantasy to people who had been hiding in asteroids for generations. In turn, they shared their knowledge with her. The survivors had spent centuries studying architect technology, learning to use and maintain the ancient systems. They knew more about the architect civilization than any human in known space. They also knew more about the Devourers. They are relentless, explained during one of their many conversations. They never stop hunting, never tire, never give up. Their only purpose is to destroy intelligent life wherever they find it. How do you fight them? We do not. Fighting the Devourers is suicide. They are stronger, faster, more numerous than any force we could muster. Our only hope is to stay hidden, to keep moving, to never leave a trace that could lead them to us. Maya thought about the modifications she had made to her architect's ship. The enhanced sensors, the improvised weapons, the plasma vent system that would destroy her own engine in exchange for one devastating attack. Maybe there is another way, she said. Looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and concern. What do you mean? I have spent months repairing that ship. I know its systems better than anyone. The architects built their technology to last, but they also built it to be adaptable. I have already modified several systems for defensive purposes. What if we could modify more? What if we could actually fight back? It would be dangerous. The Devourers have destroyed civilizations far more advanced than ours. They destroyed civilizations that were not expecting them, that did not understand what they were facing. We know the truth now. We have architect technology and human creativity. Maybe we can make a difference. Was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was thoughtful. The architects were a peaceful species. They excelled at building and exploring, but they never developed effective weapons. When the Devourers came, they had nothing to fight back with. Perhaps that is why they fell so quickly. Humans are different, Maya said. We have been warriors as long as we have been thinkers. We know how to fight. We know how to adapt. Maybe that is what the universe needs right now. The idea took root and began to grow. Maya met with the refuge's engineers and scientists, sharing her modifications and discussing possibilities. The survivors had access to facilities and equipment she had never imagined, tools left behind by the architects for situations just like this. Together, they began to plan. The first step was to fully repair Maya's ship. With proper facilities and additional help, the work that would have taken her months was completed in weeks. All 4 engines were brought back online, their crystalline containment matrices restored to perfect alignment. The hull was patched and reinforced. Systems that Maya had not even known existed were activated and integrated into the control network. But they did not stop there. Using architect technology and human ingenuity, they began to transform the exploration vessel into something entirely new, a warship. The architects had never built weapons, but they had created incredibly powerful tools. High-energy lasers designed for cutting through asteroid rock became concentrated beam weapons. Electromagnetic pulse generators intended for scientific research were adapted to overload and disable enemy sensors. The meteor shield system was redesigned to create a barrier strong enough to deflect incoming fire. Maya worked alongside the survivors, learning from them and teaching them in turn. She showed them human engineering techniques that they had never encountered. They showed her architect science that pushed the boundaries of what she thought was possible. Together, they created something neither could have built alone. The plasma vent system that Maya had improvised became the foundation for a proper weapon. The engineers discovered that by routing the engine exhaust through a focusing array, they could project a beam of superheated plasma with devastating range and accuracy. It was similar to human-directed energy weapons but far more powerful, capable of cutting through devourer hulls like paper. They built more weapons. Missile launchers adapted from architect mining equipment, kinetic cannons that fired solid slugs at velocities approaching light speed, electronic warfare systems that could jam enemy communications and disable their targeting computers. By the time they were finished, Maya's ship had been transformed from a peaceful explorer into a deadly predator. She stood on the bridge and looked out at the displays showing her new capabilities, feeling a mixture of pride and sadness. "I never wanted to be a soldier," she said to, who had joined her on the bridge. "None of us did, but sometimes the universe does not give us a choice." "Will it be enough? One ship against an enemy that destroyed an entire civilization." Smiled grimly. "One ship to start, but if your people are as numerous as you say, there may be more, perhaps many more." The plan was audacious. Maya would fly her upgraded ship back to human space, carrying the knowledge and technology of the architects. She would warn humanity about the devourers and share the survivors' expertise in fighting them. If everything went well, humans would have time to prepare, to build defenses, to develop weapons of their own. And then, when the devourers eventually found them, humanity would be ready. "There is something else," said. She handed Maya a data crystal containing the complete architect archive. "Everything we know, everything they knew. This information is more valuable than any weapon. Guard it with your life." Maya took the crystal and tucked it carefully into her suit. "What about your people? Will you come with me?" Shook her head. "We cannot leave. This refuge has protected us for generations, and there are other survivors scattered across space, hiding in similar locations. Someone needs to stay behind to coordinate with them, to share what we have learned. When I return, I will bring ships, soldiers. We will find every survivor and bring them home to Earth. I believe you will try. You are human. Stubborn, clever, impossible to kill. Perhaps that is exactly what the universe needs." Maya hugged her, a gesture that felt inadequate but necessary. Then she turned and walked back to her ship, ready to begin the long journey home. The voyage took 6 weeks at maximum speed. Maya used the time to study the architect archives, memorizing critical information in case the data crystal was lost or damaged. She learned about devourer tactics and vulnerabilities. She studied the history of their ancient war with the architects. She cataloged the locations of hidden refuges and supply caches that might someday be needed. She also encountered the devourers twice more. The first time, she detected them early and was able to change course before they spotted her. The second time they found her, 3 devourer ships emerged from behind a gas giant and moved to intercept, their weapons already charging. Maya did not run. She could not outpace them anyway. Instead, she turned her ship to face the attackers and prepared to fight. The battle was brief and violent. Maya's enhanced weapons tore through the first devourer ship before it could fire a shot. The plasma beam sliced through its hull, igniting the fuel cells inside and causing a catastrophic explosion. The other 2 ships scattered, clearly surprised by the ferocity of her defense. Maya pursued them, hunting the hunters. Her kinetic cannons hammered the second ship, puncturing its armor in a dozen places. It tried to flee, but she was faster now. A final blast from the plasma weapon finished it. The third ship managed to escape, jumping away before she could destroy it. But Maya did not care. She had won. A single human in an ancient alien ship had defeated 2 devourer warships. It was proof that the enemy could be beaten. She continued her journey, more confident now than she had been in months. The universe was dangerous, but so was she. Maya reached the outer boundaries of human space on the 43rd day of her journey. She immediately began transmitting her identification codes and distress signals, announcing her presence to any ships in range. The response was overwhelming. Within hours, 3 United Earth Patrol ships had intercepted her, their captains astonished by the massive alien vessel she was piloting. Maya explained her situation in brief terms and requested an immediate meeting with military command. She was escorted to Luna Station, where she had started her journey so many months ago. The station looked exactly as she remembered it, but everything felt different now. She had seen too much, learned too much, to ever feel truly at home again. The debriefings lasted for weeks. Military officials, scientists, government representatives all wanted to hear her story. Maya told it again and again, describing her discovery of the architect's ship, her repairs and modifications, her encounter with the survivors and the devourers. At first, they did not believe her. The idea of ancient alien civilizations and predatory weapons seemed like the ravings of a space-saddled pilot, but the evidence was undeniable. The data crystal contained information that no human could have fabricated. The ship itself was proof of technology far beyond anything humanity had achieved. Slowly, attitudes began to change. The military commissioned studies of the architect weapons Maya had developed. Scientists began analyzing the alien archives. Politicians started asking uncomfortable questions about humanity's readiness to face an external threat. Maya found herself at the center of a transformation. She was promoted, given medals, asked to lead the new defense initiative that had been formed to prepare for the devourer threat. She assembled a team of the best engineers and scientists humanity had to offer, people who could take the architect technology and make it their own. They built more warships, dozens at first, then hundreds. Each one was equipped with weapons based on Maya's designs, refined and improved with human innovation. They trained crews to use these new systems, developing tactics and strategies for fighting an enemy that humanity had never faced. And they sent expeditions into deep space to find the survivors. Maya led the first mission herself, guiding a fleet of 10 warships back to the asteroid refuge where she had met and the others. The reunion was emotional, and her people had watched Maya's ship depart months ago, not knowing if they would ever see another human face again. Now a fleet had come for them, carrying news of a humanity that was awakening to the danger and preparing to fight. The survivors joined the defense initiative, sharing their knowledge and experience with the they had never seen. They became teachers and advisors, helping humanity understand the threat they faced and how to counter it. More refuges were found. More survivors were brought home. The descendants of the ancient Endeavor were finally reunited with the civilization they had left behind. Their thousand-year exile ended. But Maya knew the real fight was still coming. The Devourers had not disappeared. They were still out there, hunting, killing, spreading their plague across the galaxy. And now they knew that humanity existed. The survivor of Maya's second battle had escaped, carrying information about human weapons and defenses back to its masters. Somewhere in the vast darkness between stars, the Devourers were planning their response. Maya stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Maya's Resolve, named in her honor by a grateful government. Around her, a fleet of 300 warships waited for orders. Behind them, the combined military forces of a dozen human worlds prepared for war. The first Devourer fleet had been detected 6 hours ago, emerging from hyperspace at the edge of human territory. Thousands of ships, more than humanity had ever seen in one place. They came in a vast wave of destruction, just as they had come for the architects 10,000 years before. But this time would be different. Maya opened a channel to her fleet. Her voice was calm, steady. "All ships, this is Fleet Commander. The enemy has arrived. They think they know us. They think we are like the species they have destroyed before. Easy prey, soft targets." She paused, looking at the tactical display showing the approaching enemy force. So many ships, so much death coming for them. They are wrong. We are human. We have survived ice ages and plagues, wars and disasters. We have crawled out of every grave the universe has dug for us and come back stronger. Today, we show them what that means. She took a deep breath. "All ships engage." The battle of humanity's frontier lasted for 3 days. 3 days of constant fighting, of ships dying on both sides, of heroism and sacrifice that would be remembered for generations. The Devourers fought with relentless fury, throwing everything they had at the human defenses. But the humans fought back harder. Maya led charge after charge into the enemy formation, her flagship cutting a path of destruction through the Devourer fleet. The weapons she had developed worked even better than she had hoped, tearing through alien hulls and scattering their formations. Human pilots flew with skill and courage that the Devourers had never encountered, adapting to every tactic and overcoming every obstacle. By the end of the 3rd day, the Devourer fleet was broken. Less than a quarter of their ships escaped into hyperspace, fleeing from the furious human defense. The rest were destroyed, reduced to expanding clouds of debris that would drift through space for eternity. Humanity had won its first battle, but Maya knew it was just the beginning. More Devourer fleets would come. More battles would be fought. The war would last for years, maybe decades, before one side or the other was finally defeated. But for the first time in 10,000 years, the Devourers faced an enemy who could hurt them. An enemy who refused to die quietly. An enemy who would fight to the last ship, the last soldier, the last breath. Humans. Maya looked out at the stars, at the vast universe that had tried so hard to kill her and failed. She thought about the dead architect's ship where her journey had begun, about the impossible repairs she had made with nothing but determination and skill, about the survivors who had waited for generations for someone to find them, about the fleet she now commanded and the people who depended on her leadership. She had started this adventure as a simple cargo pilot, stranded and alone. Now she was leading humanity into a war for survival against an enemy that had wiped out civilizations. It was funny how things worked out sometimes. Maya smiled and turned back to her displays. There was work to do. There was always work to do. But that was okay. She was human, and humans did the impossible every day. In the years that followed, the war against the Devourers spread across the galaxy. Human fleets carried the fight to enemy territory, hunting down devourer bases and destroying them one by one. The ancient weapon that had plagued the stars found itself facing something it had never encountered before, a species that refused to be prey. Maya led many of these campaigns herself, becoming a legend among both humans and the various alien species who joined the fight. Other civilizations had survived the devourer plague, hiding in remote corners of the galaxy. When they learned that someone was finally fighting back, they emerged from their refuges and added their strength to the coalition. The war lasted for 27 years, 27 years of battles and sacrifices, of victories and losses. Millions died on both sides. Entire star systems were reduced to rubble. But in the end, humanity won. The last Devourer fleet was destroyed in orbit around a dead world that had once been the heart of their operations. Maya was there to see it, old now but still commanding from her flagship. She watched the final enemy ship explode and felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she had carried for nearly 3 decades. It was over. The threat that had haunted the galaxy for 10,000 years was finally ended. Maya retired shortly after the war's conclusion. She had earned it. She settled on a quiet world far from Earth, a planet with purple forests and orange skies that reminded her of the murals she had seen on the architect's ship so long ago. Sometimes she would walk through those forests, thinking about everything that had happened. About the day pirates destroyed her freighter and left her for dead. About the cold weeks she spent alone on a dead starship, learning its secrets and bringing it back to life. About and the survivors, about the battles and the losses and the eventual victory. She had been a cargo pilot once, nothing special, just another human making her way through the universe. And then she had done the impossible. She had fixed a dead starship. She had survived against all odds. She had helped save her entire species from extinction. That was what humans did. They survived, they adapted, they overcame. Maya sat down under an alien tree and looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, human ships were still exploring, still pushing the boundaries of what was known. New worlds were being settled. New discoveries were being made. The universe was vast and full of wonders, and humanity was just getting started. She smiled and closed her eyes, content at last. Her story was finished, but humanity's story was just beginning. And that was exactly as it should be.